Hey, Cubbies. Hey, I'm online. Cool. I don't know if I can hear anything because I'm not really testing to see if I can hear anything, but I can see that my bars are going. Okay, that was just goofiness. Okay, I can hear myself on my laptop screen, which means I'm recording. God, Lord, those sounds are so screwed up. Anyway, tonight is a recording. Wow, lots of people actually doing this stuff. Kind of cool. So here's the thing. When I'm doing the recording nights, I'm essentially just recording myself doing the fairy tales. And that's usually just the nights like tonight where I'm doing Irish folk tales because I'd just like to get a fairly good recording of those done. As opposed to Fridays when I'm mildly inebriated and attempting to sell fairy tales as if through kids. I do turn off the sound alerts for when I'm doing the fairy tale, so those will be disabled while I'm doing it. And I do apologize if I don't respond right away because, well, I'm recording. I will have messages popping up occasionally if I remember to post them that will literally say that I'm recording, because they will look like this. So that's just kind of a heads up for people who haven't been to my storytelling before. Not that a whole lot of people have been to my storytelling readings before, but hey, what the hell. Anyway, I usually do it over here on my storyteller screen, so let me switch over to that. Boop. Here I am, reading a book. See? Book, me. And I'm doing the recordings on OSB. I do post these on YouTube after I get done because, well, I can. Not being an affiliate means I can do it right away, as opposed to if I was affiliated, I'd have to wait a day. So, let me go ahead and broadcast that I'm doing a recording stream. So let me. Okay. Irish. And I am only reading 2 tonight because they're fairly long, and the third one I was going to do was even longer. Ugh. So I may not really pay attention to much at all. And when the stream's over, I'm going to probably raid Striker, so. Because that's what I do. I raid peoples. I don't want to finish all of that because this is probably TOS. Okay, and I guess don't really have any other places to share it. So let's check. Make sure nothing else is going on. Okay. No one's popped up. Not surprised, but okay. Let's switch back over to my OBSB. Okay. Again, I'm only doing 2 stories tonight, so first one being the Witch of Rathdowny. So, message up. And we'll start recording in 3, 2. The Witch of Rathdowny, Anonymous. It was about 80 years ago in the north of May that a Roman Catholic clergyman near Rathdowny, in the Queen's Country, was awakened at midnight to attend the dying man in the distant part of the parish. The priest obeyed without a murmur, and having performed his duty to the expiring sinner, saw him depart this world before he left the cabin. As it was yet dark, the man who had called upon the priest offered to accompany him home, but he refused, and set forward on his journey alone. He had not gone far when the grey dawn began to appear on the hills, and he amused himself in contemplating the varied, lovely scenes prepared in the intelligent observer by the splendid breaking of a May-Day morning. The eastern sky was streaked with all the magnificent shades of crimson, blue, and gold, so peculiar to rosy May, and the brilliant morning star that shining refulgently as if it had been created by that very hour. Everything was hushed in the calm repose, except the merry lark, as Shakespeare calls her, which posed high in the air amid the fleecy gold clouds, poured forth her matin hymn of praise and gratitude to the great author of the universe, or the wild, discordant cry of the hither-bleat from the adjacent morasses, or the irregular pattering of the large dewdrops as they fell like globules of liquid silver on the stirless trees at either side of the road. The good priest was highly enraptured with the beauty of the scene, and rode on, now gazing intently at every surrounding object, and again cutting with his whip at the bats and the big beautiful night flies which flitted ever and anon from hedge to hedge across his lonely way. Thus engaged, he journeyed on slowly until the nearer approach of the sunrise began to render objects completely discernible. But he dismounted from his horse, and slipping his arm out of the rein, and drawing forth his breviary from his pocket, he commenced reading his morning office as he walked leisurely along. He had not proceeded very far when he observed the horse, a very spirited animal, endeavoring to stop on the road, and gazing intently into the field on one side of the way. There were the 3 or 4 cows gazing. However, he did not pay any particular attention to the circumstance, but went on a little further, when the horse suddenly lunged with great violence, and endeavored to break away by force. The priest with great difficulty succeeded in restraining him, and, looking at him more closely, observed him shaking from head to foot, and sweating profusely. He now stood calmly, and refused to move from where he was, nor could threats or entreaty induce him to proceed. The father was greatly astounded, but recollecting to have often heard about horses laboring under frights being induced to go by blindfolding them, he took out his handkerchief and tied it across his eyes. Then mounted, and striking him gently, he went forward without reluctance, but still sweating and trembling violently. They had not gone far when they arrived opposite a narrow path or bridleway, flanked at either side by a tall, thick hedge, which led to the high road of the field where the cows were grazing. The priest happened by chance to look into the lane, and he saw a spectacle which made the blood curdle in his veins. It was the legs of a man from the hips downwards, without a head or body, trotting up the avenue with a smarting pace. The good father was very much alarmed, but being a man of strong nerve, he resolved, come what might, to stand, and be further acquainted with this singular spectre. He accordingly stood, and so did the headless apparition, as if afraid to approach him. The priest, observing this, pulled back a little from the entrance of the avenue, and the phantom again resumed its progress. It soon arrived on the road, and the priest now had sufficient opportunity to view it minutely. It wore yellow buckskin breeches, tightly fastened at the knees with a green ribbon. It had neither shoes nor stockings on, and its legs were covered with long red hairs, and all full of wet blood and clay, apparently contracted in its progress through the thorny hedges. The priest, although very much alarmed, felt eager to examine the phantom, and for this purpose he determined to screw his courage to the sticking point, and to summon all his philosophy to enable him to speak to it. The ghost was now a little ahead, pursuing its march at the usual brisk pace, and the priest urged on the horse speedily until it came up with it, and thus addressed it. Halloa, friend, who art thou, and whither art thou going so early? The hideous spectre made no reply, but uttered a fierce and superhuman growl, or "Umph." A fine morning for ghosts to wander about, again said the priest. Another "Umph" was the reply. Why don't you speak? "Umph." You don't seem disposed to be very loquacious this morning. "Umph" again. The good man began to feel irritated at the obstinate silence of this unearthly visitor, and said, with some warmth, in the name of all that's sacred, I command you to answer me. Who art thou, and where art thou traveling? Another "Umph," more loud and more angry than before, was the only reply. Perhaps, said the father, A taste of the whipcord might render you a little bit more communicative. And so saying, he struck the apparition with a heavy blow of his whip on the breech. The phantom uttered a wild and unearthly yell and fell forward on the road. And what was the priest's astonishment when he perceived the whole place running over with milk? He was dumbstruck with amazement. The prostrate phantom still continued to eject vast quantities of milk from every part. The priest's head swam and his eyes got dizzy. A stupor came upon him for some minutes, and on his recovering the frightful spectre had vanished, and in its stead he found stretched on the road and half drowned in milk the form of Sarah Kennedy, an old woman from the neighborhood, who had been long notorious in a district for her witchcraft and superstitious practices. And it was now discovered that she had, by infernal aid, assumed that monster's shape and was employed that morning in sucking the cows of the village. Had a volcano burst at his feet, he could not have been more astonished. He gazed while with silent amazement, the old woman groaning and writhing convulsively. "Sarah," he said at length, "I have long admonished you to repent of your evil ways, but you were deaf to my entreaties, and now, wretched woman, you are surprised in the midst of your crime?" "Oh, father, father," shouted the unfortunate woman, "can you do nothing to save me? I am lost. Hell is open for me, and legions of devils surround me at this moment, waiting to carry my soul to perdition." The priest had not the power to reply. The old wretch's pains increased. Her body swelled in an immense size. Her eyes flashed as if in fire. Her face was black as night. Her entire form writhed in 1,000 different contortions. Her outcries were appalling. Her face sunk, her eyes closed, and in a few minutes she expired in the most exquisite tortures. The priests departed homewards, and called at the next cabin to give notice of the strange circumstances. The remains of Sarah Kennedy were removed to the cabin and situated on the edge of the small wood at a little distance. She had long been a resident of the neighborhood, but she still was a stranger, and came there no one knew from whence. She had no relation in that country but one daughter, now advanced in years, who resided with her. She kept one cow, and sold more butter, it was said, than any farmer in the parish. And it was generally suspected that she acquired it by devilish agency, as she made a secret of being intimately acquainted with sorcery and fairyism. She professed the Roman Catholic religion, but never complied with the practices enjoined by that church, and her remains were denied Christian scepter, and were buried in a sandpit near her own cabin. On the evening of her burial, the villagers assembled and burned her cabin to the earth. Her daughter made her escape, and never after returned. Less than holy cow. Oh, well. I'm not quite sure what to think about that story. I don't think I've read it before. Don't know if anyone came in because I've got the wrong window open. Sorry about that. ASMR nose blowing. But yeah, no wonder no one claimed the root of that story. But again, that was The Witch of Rathdownie. Do have a second story to read. I said this is going to be a fairly short stream tonight because of reasons, and The third story is considerably longer than I expected it to be. Yeah, the third story I was looking at, The Three Wishes by William Carlton, is closer to 45 pages long, whereas most of the stories I've been reading have been closer to 20 or 30 maybe at the most. Not even that. The longest story I've read so far out of this has been 15 pages, so. Anyway, the next story would be The Priest's Soul by Lady Wilde. So, since no one's here to say otherwise or interrupt me, I will post the message again. The good old record message. And, well, I'll start recording in 3, 2, 1. The Priest's Soul by Lady Wilde. In former days there were great schools in Ireland where every sort of learning was taught to the people, and even the poorest had more knowledge at that time than any gentleman had now. But as to the priests, their learning was above all, so that the fame of Ireland went over the whole world, and many kings from foreign lands used to send their sons all the way to Ireland to be brought up in the Irish schools. But now, at this time, there was a little boy learning at one of them, who was a wonder to everyone for his cleverness. His parents were only laboring people, and of course very poor. But young as he was, and as poor as he was, no king's nor lord's son could come up to him in learning. Even the masters were put to shame, for when they were trying to teach him, he would tell them something they had never heard before, and show them their ignorance. One of the great triumphs was his argument. He would go on till he proved to you that black was white, and then when you gave in, for no one could beat him in talk, he would turn around and show you that white was black, or may that there was no color in the world at all. When he grew up, his poor father and mother were so proud of him that they resolved to make him a priest, which they did at last, though they nearly starved themselves to get the money. Well, such another learned man was not in Ireland, and he was as great in arguments as ever, so that no one could stand before him. Even the bishops tried to talk to him, but he showed them at once they knew nothing at all. Now there were no schoolmasters in those times, but it was the priest that taught the people. And as this man was the cleverest in Ireland, for all foreign kings sent their sons to him as long as they had house room to give them, so he grew very proud and began to forget how low he had been, and worst of all, even to forget God, who had made him what he was. The pride of the arguing had got hold of him, so that from one thing to another he went to prove that there was no purgatory, and then no hell, and then no heaven, and then no God, and at last that men had no souls, but were no more than a dog or a cow, and when he died there was an end of them. Whoever saw a soul, he would say, if you can show me one, I will believe. No one could make any answer to this, and at last they all came to believe that there was no other world. Every one might do as they liked in this. The priest settled, for example, for he took a beautiful young girl to wife. But was no priest or bishop in the whole land who could be got to marry them. He was obliged to read the service over himself. It was a great scandal, yet no one dared to say a word, for all the king's sons were on his side, and would have slaughtered anyone who tried to prevent the wicked goings on. Poor boys, they all believed in him, and thought every word he said was the truth. In this way, notions began to spread about, and the whole world was going to be bad. When one night an angel came down from heaven and told the priest he had but 24 hours to live. He began to tremble and asked for a little more time. But the angel was stiff and told him that he could not. "What do you want me time for, you sinner?" he asked. "Oh, sir, have pity on my poor soul," urged the priest. "Oh ho, then you have a soul then," said the angel. "Pray, how did you find that out?" "It has been fluttering in me ever since you appeared," answered the priest. "What a fool I was to not think of it before." "A fool indeed," said the angel. "What good was all your learning when it could not tell you that you had a soul?" "Ah, my lord," said the priest, "if I am to die, tell me how soon I may be in heaven." "Never," replied the angel. "You denied there was a heaven." "Then, my lord, may I go to purgatory?" "You denied purgatory also. You must go straight to hell," said the angel. "But, my lord, I denied hell also," answered the priest. You can't send me there either." The angel was a little puzzled. "Well," he said, "I'll tell you what I can do for you. You may either live now on earth for 100 years, enjoying every pleasure, and then be cast into hell forever, or you may die in 24 hours in the most horrendous torments, and pass through purgatory, there to remain until the day of judgment. If only you can find some one person that believes, and through his belief mercy will be fed to you, and your soul will be saved." The priest did not take 5 minutes to make up his mind. "I will have the death in 24 hours," he said, "so that my soul may be saved at last." On this, the angel gave him the directions as to what he was to do, and left him. Then immediately the priest entered a large room where all the scholars and king's sons were seated, and calling out to them, "Now tell me the truth, and let none fear to contradict me. Tell me, what is your belief? Have you men's souls?" "Master," they answered, "once we believed that men had souls, but thanks to your teaching, we no longer believe so. There is no hell, no heaven, and no God. This is our belief, for it is thus you taught us." Then the priest grew pale with fear and cried, "Listen, I have taught you a lie. There is a God, and man has an immortal soul. I believe now all I denied before." But the shouts of laughter that rose drowned the priest's very voice, for they thought he was only trying them for their argument. "Prove it, master," they cried. "Prove it! Who has ever seen God, and who has ever seen the soul?" The room was stirred with the laughter. The priest stood up to answer them, but no word could he utter. All his eloquence, all his powers of argument had gone from him, and he could do nothing but writhe his hands and cry out, "There is a God! There is a God! Lord, have mercy on my soul!" And they all began to mock him and repeat his own words that he had taught them. "Show us to him! Show us your God!" And he fled the groaning with agony, for he saw that none believed, and how then could his soul be saved? But he thought next of his wife. "She will believe," he said to himself. "Women never give up on God." And he went to her, but she told him that she believed only what he taught her, and that a good wife should believe her husband first, then before and above all things in heaven or earth. Then despair came on him, and he rushed from the house and began to ask everyone he met if they believed. But the same answer came from one and all: "We believe only what you have taught us." For all his doctrines had spread far and wide through the country. Then he grew half mad with fear, for the hours were passing, and he flung himself down on the ground in a lonesome spot, and wept and groaned in terror, for the time was coming fast when he must die. Just then a little child came by. "God save you kindly," said the child to him. The priest stared up. "Child, do you believe in God?" he asked. "I have come from a far country where we learn about him," said the child. "Will you honor direct me to the best school that they have said is in these parts?" "The best school and the best teacher is close by," said the priest, and he named himself. "Oh no, not that man," answered the child, "for I am told he denies God and heaven and hell. And even that man has a soul, because we can't see it, but I would soon put him down." The priest looked at him earnestly. "How?" he inquired. "Why," said the child, "I would ask him if he believed. He had to show me his life." "But he could not do that, my child," he said. "Life cannot be seen. We have it, but it is invisible." "Then if we have life, though we cannot see it, we may also have a soul, though it is invisible," answered the child. When the priest heard him speak these words, he fell down on his knees before him, weeping for joy, for now he knew his soul was safe. He had met at least one that believed, and he told the child his whole story, all his wickedness, his pride and blasphemy against the great God, and how the angel had come to him and told him the only way in which he could be saved, through the faith and prayers of someone that believed. "Now then," he said to the child, "take this penknife and strike it against my breast, and go on stabbing my flesh until you see the paleness of skin and death on my face. Then watch, for a living thing will soar up from my body, else I die. And you will then know that my soul has ascended to the presence of God. And when you see the thing, make haste and run into my school and call on my scholars to come and see that the soul of their master has left the body, and that all he taught to them was a lie. For there is a God who punishes sin, and a heaven and a hell, and that man has an immortal soul destined for eternal happiness or misery." "I will pray," said the child, "to have courage to do this work." And he kneeled down and prayed, and when he rose up to take the penknife and stuck it into the priest's heart, and struck it again and again until all the flesh was lacerated, but still the priest lived through. The agony was horrible, for he could not die until the 24 hours expired. At last the agony seemed to cease, and the stillness of death settled in his face. Then the child, who was watching, saw a beautiful living creature, with 4 snow-white wings, mount from the dead man's body to the air and go fluttering around his head. So he ran to bring the scholars, and when they saw it, they all knew that it was the soul of their master, and they watched with wonder and awe as it passed from sight to the clouds. And this is the first butterfly that was ever seen in Ireland. And now all men know that the butterflies are the souls of the dead waiting for the moment when they may enter purgatory, and so pass through torture to purification and peace. But the school of Ireland were quite deserted after that time, for people said, "What is the use of going so far to learn where the wisest in all the Ireland did not know if he had a soul until he was near losing it, and was only saved at last through the simple belief of a little child." Um, okay, that's a bit of a gobsmack there. So, butterflies are souls waiting to go to purgatory to get before going to heaven. But a priest can convince a little kid to kill him. to prove that a soul exists. I'm not really sure how to take that. um, in stabbing a penknife to the chest repeatedly to prove that the soul exists. Um, I really don't know how I feel about that. I really don't know if I want to try to read this next story or not. Because it'll get us from page 75 up to 109. How the story after that goes from 110 to 128. I'm not sure I want to tackle those tonight. And this does make it for a fairly short stream because this has only been a little over half an hour. How I put up a poll, but no one's here to answer it. So I'm debating on whether I want to go ahead and try to read another one. Ugh. And I normally like to do like hour-long readings, but I've been 38 so far. And who's going to come in and listen to me when they could be watching Critical Role? I mean, honestly. You know what? I may read it anyway. Get me through 3 wishes. Leave Legend of Knockmany and see what's the final one. The Shoemaker for the last in this little series, and that'll get this book finished. Then I'll have to come up with something else to do with Thursday nights. Oh, I only started this because I was doing it. Started on St. Patrick's Day. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna read 3 wishes. I'm gonna read it. So yeah. Yeah. One more record, Cubs. Pop the message. Alrighty then. And we will start recording in 3, 2. The 3 wishes. by William Carleton. In ancient times there lived a man named Billy Dawson, and he was known to be a great rogue. They say he was descended from the family of the Dawsons, which was the reason, I suppose, for him carrying their name upon him. Billy was in his youthful days, and was the best hand at doing nothing in all Europe. Devil and mortal could come next to him in the idleness, and in consequence of his great practice that way, you may be sure that if any man were to make a fortune it by it, he would have done it. Billy was the only son of his father, barring 2 daughters, but they have nothing to do with the story I'm telling you. Indeed, it was a kind father and godfather for Billy to be handy at the knavery as well as the idleness, for it was well known that not one of their blood ever did an honest act, except with roguish intention. In short, they were altogether a Dyson connection, and a credit to the name. As for Billy, with all the villainy of his family, both plain and ornamental, came down to him by the way of legacy, for it so happened that the father, in spite of all his cleverness, had nothing but his roguery to leave him. Billy, to do him justice, improved the fortune he got. Every day advanced him farther into dishonesty and poverty until, at the long run, he was acknowledged by on all the hands to be the completest swindler and the poorest vagabond in the whole parish. Billy's father, in his younger days, had often been forced to acknowledge the inconvenience of not having a trade, in consequence of a nice point in law, called the Vagrant Act, that sometimes troubled him. On the account he made up his mind to give Billy an occupation, and accordingly bound him to be a blacksmith. But whether Bill was to live or die by the forgery was a puzzle to his father, though the neighbors said that both was likely. At all events, he was put apprentice to the smith for 7 years, and had a hard card his master had to play in managing him. They took the proper method, however, for Bill was so lazy and roguish that it would vex a saint to keep him in order. Bill, says his master to him one day when he had been sunning himself about the ditches instead of minding his business, Bill, my boy, I'm vexed to the heart to see you in such bad state of health. You're very ill with that complaint about all overness, however, says he. I think I can cure you. Nothing will bring you about but 3 or 4 sound doses every day of a medicine they called the oil of the old hazel. Take the first dose now, says he, and immediately banged him. Whereas a hazel cudgel until Bill's bones ached for a week afterwards. If you were my son, said his master, I tell you that, as long as I could get a piece of advice growing convenient from the hedges, I'd have you a different youth from what you were. If working was a sin, Bill, not an innocenter boy ever broke bread than you would be. Good people is scarce, you think, but however that may be, I throw it out as a hint that you must take your medicine till you're cured, whenever you happen to get unwell in the same way. From this out he kept Bill's nose to the grinding stone, and whenever he complaint returned, he never failed to give him a hearty dose of his improvement. In the course of time, however, Bill was his own man and his own master. But it would puzzle his saints to know whether the master or the man was more precious youth in the eyes of the world. He immediately married a wife, and devil a doubt of it, but if he kept her in whiskey and sugar, she kept him in hot water. Bill drank and she drank. Bill fought and she fought. Bill was idle and she was idle. Bill whacked her and she whacked Bill. If Bill gave her one black eye, she gave him another, just to keep herself in countenance. Never was there a blessed pair so well met, and a beautiful sight it was to see them both at breakfast time blinking at each other across the potato basket. Bill with his right eye black, and she with her left. In short, they were the talk of the whole town. And to see Bill of a morning staggering home drunk, his shirt sleeves rolled up on his smutted arms, his breast open in the old tattered leather apron, with one corner tucked underneath his belt, singing one minute and fighting with his wife the next. She, reeling beside him, with a discolored eye and forehead, a dirty ragged cap on one side of her head, and a pair of Bill's old slippers on her feet, a squalling child in her arm, now scuffing and dragging Bill, and again kissing and hugging him. Yes, it was a pleasant picture to see this loving pair in such a state. This might do for a while, but it would not last. They were idle, drunken, and ill-conducted, and it was not to be supposed that they would get a far thing handle from their words. They were of course through the great straits in faith. They soon found that their fighting and drinking and idleness made them to be the laughing sport of the neighbors. But neither brought food to their table to their children, put a coat upon their backs, nor satisfied their landlord when he came to look for his own. Still, the never one of Bill was a funny fellow with strangers, though, as we said, the greatest rogue unhanged. One day he was standing against his own anvil, completely in a brown study, being brought to his wits' end on how to make the breakfast for the family. The wife was scolding and cursing in the house, and the naked creatures of childlike squalling about their knees for food. Bill was fairly at an impasse, and knew not where to or how to turn himself, when the poor withered old beggar came unto the forge, tottering on his staff. A long white beard fell from his chin, and he looked so thin and hungry that you might blow him, one would think, over the house. Bill, at this moment, had been brought to his senses by distress, and his heart had a touch of pity towards the old man, for, on looking at him a second time, he clearly saw starvation and sorrow in his face. "God save you, honest man," said Bill. The old man gave a sigh, and raising himself with great pain on his staff, he looked at Bill in every beseeching way. "Musha, God save you kindly," says he. "Maybe you could give a poor, hungry, helpless old man a mouthful of something to eat. You see yourself I'm not able to work. If I was, I'd sworn to be beholding it to anyone." "Faith, honest man," said Bill, "if you knew who you're speaking to, you'd soon ask a monkey for churn staff as me to either mate or money. There's not a blackguard in the three kingdoms so fairly on the Shingrad as I am for both one and the other. The wife within is sending the curses thick and heavy on me, and the children's play with a cat's medley to keep her in comfort. Take my word for it, poor man, if I had either mates or money, I'd help you, for I know particularly well what it is to want at the peasant speaking. An empty sack won't stand, neighbor." So far, Bill told him truth. A good thought was in his heart, because he found himself on a footing with a beggar. And nothing brings down pride or softens a heart like feeling what it is to want. "Why, you are in worse state than I am," said the old man. You have a family to provide for, and I have only myself to support.
You are in worse state than I am, said Bill.
You may kiss the book on that, my old
Worthy,
worthy, replied Bill. But
But
come, what I can do for you I will. Plant yourself up here beside the fire, and I'll give you a blast or two of my bellows that will warm the old blood in your body. It's cold, miserable, snowy day, and the good heat will be of service. Thank you kindly, said the old man. I am cold, and a warming at your fire will do me good. Oh, and it is a bitter, bitter day. God bless it. He then sat down, and Bill blew a rousing blast that soon made the stranger edge back from the fire. In a short time he felt quite comfortable, and when the numbness was taken out of his joints, he buttoned up and prepared to depart. Now, says he to Bill, you hadn't the food to feed me, but what you could do, you did. Ask any 3 wishes you choose, and be they what they may. Take my word for it, they shall be granted. Now, the truth is that Bill, though he believed himself a great man in the point of cuteness, wanted, after all, a full quarter of being square, for there is always great difference between a wise man and a knave. Bill was so much of a rogue that he could not, for the blood of him, ask an honest wish, but stood scratching his head in a puzzle. 3 wishes, said he. Well, let me see. Did you say 3? Aye, replied the stranger. 3 wishes. That was what I said. Well, said Bill, here goes. Aha! Let me alone, my old worthy. Faith, I'll overreach the parish if you say what is true. I'll cheat them in dozens, rich and poor, old and young. Let me alone, man. I have it here? And he tapped his forehead with great glee. Faith, you're the sort to meet the frosty morning when a man wants his breakfast. And I'm sorry I have neither money nor credits to get the bottle of whiskey, that we might take our morning together. Well, let us hear the wishes, said the old man. My time is short, and I cannot stay much longer. Do you see the sledgehammer? Said Bill. I wish, in the first place, that whoever takes it up in their hands may never be able to lay it down till I give them leave, and that whoever begins to sledge with it may never stop sledging until it's my pleasure to release him. Secondly, I have an armchair, and I wish that whoever sits down in it may never rise out of it till they have my consent. And thirdly, that whatever money I put into my purse, nobody may have power to take it out but myself. You devil's rip, said the old man in a passion, shaking his staff across Bill's nose. Why did you not ask something that would save you both here and hereafter? Sure, it's a common as the market cross that there's not a vagabond in the Majesty's dominion that stands in more need of both. Oh, by the 11, said Bill, I forgot that altogether. Maybe you'd be civil enough to let me change one of them. The third porter wish was made, and then I'll make, if you'll give me another chance. Get out, you reprobate, said the old fellow, still in a passion. Your day of grace is past. Little you knew who was speaking to you all the time. I'm St. Moroky, you blackguard, and I gave you the opportunity of doing something with yourself and your family. But you neglected it, and now your fate is cast. You dirty, bog-trogging profligate. Sure, it's well known that what you are. Aren't you the byword of everybody's mouth? You and your child's, you and your scold of a wife? By this and by that, if you ever happen to come across me again, I'll send you to where you won't freeze, you villain. Ooh. He then gave Bill a rap of his cudgel over the head, and laid him in length beside the bellows. kicked the broken coal scuttle out of the way, and left the forge in a fury. When Billy recovered himself from the effects of the blow, he began to think on what happened. He could have quartered himself with vexation for not asking great wealth as one of the wishes at least. But now the die was cast on him, and he could only make the most of the three of pitch that he pitched upon. He now bethought him now he might turn to the best account, and here the cunning came to his aid. He began by sending for the wealthiest neighbors to pretence of business, and when they got them under the roof, he offered them an armchair to sit down in. He now had them safe, nor could all the arts of man relieve them except Worthy Bill was willing. Bill's plan was to make the best bargain he could before releasing his prisoners, and let him alone for knowing how to make their purses bleed. There wasn't a wealthy man in the country he did not fleece. The parson of the parish bled heavily, so did the lawyer and the rich attorney, for who had returned from practice swore that the Court of Chancery itself was paradise compared to Bill's chair. This was all very good for a time. The fame came of the chair, however, soon spread, and so did that of his sledge. In a short time neither man, woman, nor child would darken his door, all avoiding him and his fixtures as they would a spring gun or main trap. Bill, so long as he fleeced his neighbors, never wrought a hand's turn, so that when his money was out, he found himself as badly off as ever. In addition to all this, his character was 50 times worse than before, for it was the general belief that he had dealings with the old boy. Nothing now could exceed his misery, distress, or ill tempers. His wife and he and their children had fought among one another. Everybody hated them, cursed them, and avoided them. The people thought they were acquainted with more than Christian people ought to know. This, of course, came to Bill's ears, and it vexed him very much. One day he was walking out in the fields and thinking of how he could raise the wind once more. The day was dark, and he found himself, before he stopped, and in the bottom of a lovely glen covered in great bushes that grew on either side. Well, thought he, when every other means of raising money failed him, it's reported that I'm in the league with the old boy, and it's a folly to have the connection without the profit. I'm ready to make a bargain with him any day, so, said he, raising his voice, Nick, you sinner, if you be convinced and willing, why stand out here? Show your best leg, and here's your man. The words were hardly out of his mouth when the dark, sober-looking old gentleman, not unlike the lawyer, walked up to him. Bill looked at the foot and saw the hoof. "Morrow, Nick," said Bill. "Morrow, Bill," said Nick. "Well, Bill, what's the news?" "Devil, much I myself hears of late," says Bill. "There is anything fresh below?" "I can't exactly say, Bill. I spend a little of my time down now. The Tories are in office, and my hands are consequently too full of business here to pay much attention to anything else." "A fine plan this, sir," says Bill, "to take a constitutional walk in. When I want an appetite I often come this way. High feeding is very bad without exercise." "High feeding? Come, Bill, you know you didn't waste a morsel of these 24 hours." "You know that's a bounce, Nick. I eat the breakfast in the morning and put a stone of flesh on my... I eat a breakfast this morning that would put a stone of flesh on you, if only you smelt it. No matter, this is not the purpose. What's that you were muttering to yourself ago? If you want to come to be Brunt, I'm here for you. Nick, said Bill, you contemplate. You want nothing barring a pair of O'Brien O'Leary's breeches. Bill, in fact, was bent on making the companion open to the bargain, because he had often heard that in case, with proper care on his own part, he might defeat him in the long run. The other, however, was his match. What was this nature of Brian's garment? Inquired Nick. You know the song, said Bill. Now, Brian O'Lynn had no breeches to wear, so he got a sheepskin and made him a pair. With the fleshy side out and the woolly side in, there'll be a pleasant and cool, says Brian O'Lynn. A cool pair would serve you, Nick. You're mighty waggish today, Mr. Dawson. A good right I have, said Bill. I'm a man snug and well-to-do in the world, have lots of money and plenty of good eating and drinking. And what more need a man to wish for? True, said the other. In the meantime, it's rather odd that so respectable a man should not have 6 inches of unbroken cloth in his apparel. You are as naked as a tatterdemalion as I ever laid my eyes on. In a full dress, you're a party for scarecrows, William. That's my own fancy, Nick. I don't work in my trade like a gentleman. This is my forge dress, you know. Well, but what did you summon me here for? Said the other. You may as well speak out, I tell you, for, my good friend, unless you do, I shan't smell that. I smell more than that, said Bill. And by the way, I think you give me the windy side of you. Curse old sulphur, I say. There, that's what I call an improvement in my condition. But as you are so stiff, says Bill, why, the short and the long of it is that ham you see there, sure you know I have a thriving little trade of my own, and that if I needn't be a loss. But in the meantime, I'd rather in a kind of so-so, don't you take? Bill winked knowingly, hoping the trick on him would be the first proposal. You must speak above board, my friend, says the other. I'm a man of few words, blunt and honest. If you have anything to say, be plain. Don't think I can be losing my time with such a pitiful rascal as you are. Well, said Bill, I want money then. I'm ready to come into terms. What do you say to that, Nick? Let me see. Let me look at you, says his companion, turning to him. Now, Bill, in the first place, you are not as finished a scarecrow as ever stood upon 2 legs. I play second fiddle to you there again, says Bill. There you stand with the blackguard's coat of arms quartered under your eye, and don't make little blackguards, says Bill, nor speak despairingly of your own crest. Why, what would you bring, you brazen rascal, if you were fairly put up in the auction? Faith, I'd bring more bidders than you would, said Bill, if you were to go off to auction tomorrow. I tell you they should bid downwards to come to your value, Nicholas. We have no coins small enough to purchase you. Well, no matter, said Nick. If you are willing to be mine at the expiration of 7 years, I will give you more money than ever the rascal brig of you was worth. Done, said Bill, with no disparagement to my family in the meantime. So down with the hard cash, don't be a nagger. The money was accordingly paid down, but as nobody was present except the giver and the receiver, the amount of what Bill got was never known. Won't you give me a luck penny? Said the old gentleman. Tut, said Billy. No prosperous old fellow, you cannot want it. However, bad luck to you, with all my heart, and it's rubbing grease on a fat pig to say so. Be off now, or I'll commit suicide on you. Your absence is a cordial to most people, you infernal old profligate. You have injured my morals enough, even for the short time you have been with me, for I don't find myself as virtuous as you. Is that your gratitude, Billy? Is it gratitude speak of you, man? I wonder you don't blush when you name it. However, when you come again, if you bring a third eye on your head, you will see that I'm Maine. Nicholas, a harder. The old gentleman, as Bill spoke, hopped across the ditch and on his way to Downing Street, where of late 'tis thought he possesses much influence. Bill now began by degrees to show off, but still wrought a little of his trade to blindfold neighbors. In a very short time, however, he became a great man. So long needed as he was a poor rascal, no decent person would speak to him. Even as the proud serving men of the big house would turn up at their noses at him. And he well deceived to be made little of by others, because he was mean enough to make little of himself. But when it was seen and shown that he had oceans of money, it was wonderful to think, although he was new and a greater blackguard than ever, how those who despised him before began to come around to him and court his company. Bill, however, had neither sense nor spirit to make of those sunshiny friends know their distance. Not he. Instead of that, he was proud to be seen in decent company, and so long as the money lasted, it was "Hail, fellow, well met," between himself and every fair-faced sponger who had a horse under him, a decent coat on his back, and a good appetite to eat his dinners. With riches and all, Bill was the same man still, but somehow or other, there's a great difference between a rich profligate and a poor one, and Bill found it so in its cost in both cases. For half of the 7 years had passed, Bill had his carriage, his equipages, his hand, and glove with Lord this and with Lord that, kept hounds and hunters, and was the first sportsman of the Curragh. Patronizing every boxing ruffian he could pick up, and betted night and day on cards, dice, and horses. Bill, in short, should be a blood, and except he did all this, and he could not presume to mingle with the fashionable bloods of his time. It's an old proverb, however, that what is got over the devil's back is sure to go off under it, and in Bill's case has proved true. In short, the old boy himself could not supply him with the money so fast as he made it fly, and it was easy come, easy go with Bill, and no sign was on it before he came within 2 years of the time he found the purse empty. And now came the value of his summer friends to be known. When it was discovered that the cash was no longer flush about him, that stud with the carriage and the hounds was going to the hammer. Whish. Off they went, friends, relations, pot companions, dinner eaters, blacklegs, and all, like a flock of crows that had smelt gunpowder. Down Bill went, soon week after week and day after day, until at last he was obliged to put on a leather apron and take up the hammer again. And not only that, for as no experience could make him wise, for once more began his taproom brawls, quarreled with Judy, and took his high feeding on the dry potatoes and salt. Now, too, came those cutting tongues of all that knew him, like razors upon him. Those that he had scorned because they were poor and himself rich, now paid him back with his own interest. and those he measured himself with, because they were rich, and only who countenanced him in consequence of his wealth, gave him the hardest word on their cheeks. The devil mend him, he deserved it all, and more if he got it. Bill, however, who was the hardened sinner, never fretted himself down an ounce of flesh by what was said to him or of him. Not he. He cursed and fought and swore and schemed away as usual, taking in everyone he could, and surely none could match him at villainy of all sorts and sizes. At last the 7 years became expired, and Bill was one morning sitting at his forge, sober and hungry, his wife cursing him and the child squealing, and as before he was thinking about how he might defraud some honest neighbor out of breakfast to stop their mouths and his too, when who walks in on him but old Nick to demand his bargain. "Morrow, Bill," he said with a sneer. "The devil himself welcomes you," says Bill, "but you have a fresh memory." "A bargain's a bargain between two honest men any day," says Satan. "When I speak of honest men, I mean yourself and me, Bill." And he put his tongue in his cheek and made game of the unfortunate rogue he had come for. "Nick, my worthy fellow," said Bill, "have bowels. You shouldn't do a shabby thing. You shouldn't have to disgrace your own character by putting more weight upon a falling man. You know what it is to get a come down yourself, so worthy, just to keep your toe on the pump, and walk off with yourself and someone else. A cool walk will save you from better than my companion, Nicholas." "Bill, it's no use shirking," said his friend. "Your swindling tricks may enable you to cheat others, but you won't cheat me, I guess. You want nothing to make you perfect in your way but to travel, and travel you shall under my guidance, Billy. No, no, I'm not to be swindled by a good fellow. I have a rather better opinion of myself, Mr. D, than to think that you could outwit Nicholas Clutie, Esquire. "You may sneer, you sinner," replied Bill, "but I tell you I have outwitted men who could buy and sell you to your face. To spare you, villain, when I tell you that no attorney could stand before me." Satan's countenance got blank when he heard that. He wriggled and fidgeted about, and then appeared to be not quite comfortable. "In that case, then," he said, "the sooner I deceive you the better, so to turn you for the Low Countries." "Is it to come to that in earnest?" said Bill, "and are you going to act as a rascal as the long run?" "'Pon honor, Bill." "Have patience, then, you sinner, till I finish this horseshoe. It's the last of a set I'm finishing, and for one of your friend, the attorney's horses. And here, Nick, I hate idleness. You know it's the mother of mischief. Take the sledgehammer and have a couple dozen strokes or so, till I get it out of your hands. And then there's with you, since it must be so." He then gave the bellows a puff that blew half a peck of dust at Clubfoot's face, whipped out the red-hot iron, and set Satan sledging away for the bare life. "Faith," says Bill to him, when the shoe was finished, "it's 1,000 pities over the sledge that should be out of your hand. And great Spargo was a child to you at sledging. You're such an able tyke. Now just exercise yourself till I bid the wife and child goodbye, then I'm off." Out went Bill, of course, without the slightest notion of coming back. No more than Nick had that he could be give a sledging. Indeed, neither could be true, but was forced to work away at if all he was sledging for a wager. This was just what Bill wanted. He was now compelled to sledge on until it was Bill's pleasure to release him, and so we leave him very industriously employed, while we took after the worthy who outwitted him. In the meantime, Bill broke cover and took to country at large, wrought a little journey work wherever he could, and in this way went from one place to another till the course of a month. He walked back very coolly to his own forge to see how things went in his absence. There he found Satan in a rage, perspiration pouring out of him, torrents, hammering with a might and main on the marked anvil. Bill calmly leaned his back against the wall, placed his hat upon the side of his head, put his hands into his breech pockets, and began to whistle Sean Scott's hornpipe. At length, he says in a very quiet, good-humored way, "Morrow, Nick." "Oh," says Nick, still hammering away. "Oh, you double-disdained villain. May the most refined, ornamental, double-rectified, super-extra, and original collection of curses that ever be gathered into a single nosegay of ill fortune shine on the buttonhole of your conscience while while your name is Bill Dawson. I denounce you, a double-milled villain, a finished pot-pressed knave, in comparison of all the other knaves I never knew, attorneys included, are honest men. I brand you as a pearl of cheats, a tip-top taken. I denounce you, I say again, for the villainous treatment I received at your hands for this most untoward and unfortunate transaction between us. For unfortunate in every sense is he that has anything to do with this, such as a prime and finished impostor." "You're very warm, Nicky," says Bill. "What puts you into a passion, you old sinner?" "Sure, if it's your own will and pleasure to take exercise in my angel, and not to be abused for it. Upon my credit, Nicky, you ought to blush for using such blackguard languages, so unbecoming of your grain of character. You cannot say that it was set hammering an empty anvil, you profligate. However, as you are so industrious, I simply say it would take 1,000 pities to take it away from you. Nick, I love industry in my heart, and I've always to encourage it. You work away, it's not often you spend your time so creditably. I'm afraid if you weren't at that, you'd be worse employed." "Bill have bowels," said the operative. "You wouldn't go to lay more weight on the falling man, you know. You wouldn't disgrace your character by such a piece of iniquity, by keeping an offensive gentleman, advanced in years, in such unbecoming and rascally job as this. Generosity's your top virtue, Bill. But not that you have any other excellent ones, as well as that, among which, as you say yourself, I reckon industry. But still in its generosity you shine. Come, Bill, honor bright, and release me." "Name your terms, you profligate." "You're above terms, William. A generous fellow like you never thinks of terms." "Goodbye, old gentleman," said Bill, very coolly. "I'll drop in to see you once a month." "No, no, Bill, you you excellent, worthy, delightful fellow. Not so fast, not so fast. Come, name your terms, you slint. My dear Bill, name your terms." "7 years more." "I agree, but—" "And the same supply of cash as before, down on the nail here." "Very good, very good. You're rather simple, Bill. Rather soft, I must confess. Well, no matter. I shall yet return to the um, you are an exceedingly simple fellow, Bill. Still, there will come a day, my dear Bill, there will come—" "Do you grumble, you vagrant? Another word and I double your terms."
grumble, you vagrant. In other words,
Mum, William, Mum. Tas is Latin for candle. 7 years more of grace in the same measure of the needful that I got before. Aye or no? Of course, Bill. Aye, say. There's the cash. Accept the terms. Oh, blood, the rascal of grace, Bill. Now drop the hammer and vanish, says Bill. But what would you think to take the sledge while you stay and give me a why in such a hurry? He added, seeing that Satan withdraw the double nick of time.
Why in such a hurry? He added, seeing Satan withdraw the double nick of time.
Hello, Nicholas, he shouted. Come back, you forgot something. And when the old gentleman looked back behind him, Billy shook the hammer at him, on which he vanished altogether. Billy now got onto his old courses, and what shows the kind people of the world made of, he also took up his old company. When they saw that he had money once more, and was sowing it about him in all directions, they immediately began to find excuses of his former extravagance. Say what you will, said one, Bill Dawson's a spirited fellow, and bleeds like a prince. He's a hospitable man of his own house, or out of it, as ever lived, said another. His only fault is, observed another, that he is, if anything, too generous, and doesn't know the value of money. His fault's on the right side, however. He has a spunk in him, says the fourth. Keeps a capital table, prime wines, and standing welcome with his friends. Why, said a fifth, if he doesn't enjoy his money when he lives, he won't when he's dead. So more power to him, and a wider throat to his purse. If he doesn't enjoy his money when he lives, he won't when he's dead. So more power to him, and a wider throat. Indeed, the very persons who were cramming themselves at his expense despised him at heart. They knew very well, however, how to take him on the weak side. Praise his generosity, and he would do anything. Call him a man of spirit, and he would fleece them to his face. Sometimes he would toss a purse of guineas to a knave, another to that flatterer, a third to a bully, and the fourth to some broken-down rake. And all to convince him that he was a sterling friend, a man of metal and liberality. But never was he known to help a victorious or struggling family, to assist the widow or the fatherless, or to do any other act that was truly useful. It is to be supposed the reason of this was that he spent it, as most of the world do, in service of the devil, and by whose aid he got it. He was prevented by turning it to a good account. Between you and me, dear reader, there are more persons acting after Bill's fashion in the same world than you dreamt of. When his money was out again, his friends played him the same rascally game once again. No sooner did his poverty become plain than the knaves began to be troubled with small fits of modesty, such as an unwillingness to come into his place when there was no longer anything to be got out of there. A kind of virgin bashfulness prevented them from speaking to him when they saw him getting out on the wrong side of his clothes. Many of them would turn away from him in the prettiest and most delicate manner when they thought he wanted to borrow money from them, all for fear of putting him to blush by asking it. Others again, when they saw him coming towards the house about dinner time, would become so confused from mere gratitude as to think themselves from another place. And their servants, seized as it were, the same feeling would tell Bill that their masters were not at home. At length, after traveling the same villainous round as before, Bill was compelled to betake himself, at the last remedy, to the forge. In other words, he found that there is, after all, nothing in the world that a man can rely on so firmly and surely as his own industry. Bill, however, wanted the organ of common sense, for his experience, and it was sharp enough to leave an impression, ran off him like water off a duck. He took to his employment sorely against his grain, and now he had no choice. must either work or starve, and starvation was like great doctor. Nobody tries it until the other remedies fail them. Bill had been twice rich, twice a gentleman among blackguards, and always a blackguard among gentlemen, for no wealth or acquaintance with decent society would rub the rust off his native vulgarity off of him. He was now common blinking sod at his forge, a drunken bully in the tap room, cursing and browbeating everyone as well as his wife, boasting of how much money he spent on his day, swaggering about the high doings he carried on, telling stories about himself and Lord the Covenant, the dinners he gave, how much it cost him, attempting to extort credit upon the strength of the former wealth. He was too ignorant, however, to know that he was publishing his own disgrace, and that it was a mean-spirited thing to be proud of what ought to make his blush through a deal board 9 inches thick. He was one morning industriously engaged in quarrel with his wife, who, with a three-legged stool in her hand, appeared to mistake his head for his own anvil. In the meantime, he paid addresses to her about apron, then who steps to jog his memory of the little agreement that was between them, but old Nick. The wife, it seems, in spite of all her exertions to the contrary, was getting the worst of it, and Sir Nicholas, willing to appear a gentleman of great gallantry, thought he could not do less than to take up a lady's quarrel, particularly as Bill had laid her in a sleeping posture. Now Satan thought this too bad, and he felt himself under many obligations to the sex. He determined to defend one of them to the present occasion, so as Judy rose, he turned upon the husband, and floored him with a clever facer. "You unmanly villain," said he, "is this the way you treat your wife? Upon honor, Bill, I'll chastise you on the spot. I cannot stand by, a spectator of such ungentlemanly conduct without giving up all claim to gallant." Whack! The word was divided by his mouth by a blow of the churnstaff from Judy, who no sooner saw Bill struck than she nailed Satan, who fell once more. "What, you villain? That's for striking my husband like a murderer behind his back," said Judy, and she suited across the action of the word. "That's for interfering between a man and wife. What, you murder the poor man before my face, eh? If he baits me, you shabby dog, who is the baiter right? I'm sure it's nothing out of your pocket. Must you have your finger in every pie?" This was anything but idle talk, for at every word she gave him a resemblance hot and heavy. Nicholas backed, danced, and hopped. She advanced, still drubbing him with a great perseverance, till at length he fell into the redoubtable armchair, which stood exactly behind him. Bill, who had been putting in 2 blows for Judy's one, seeing that his enemy was safe, now got between the devil and his wife, a situation that few will be disposed to envy him. "Tenderness, Judy," said the husband. "I hate cruelty. Go put the tongs in the fire and make them red hot. Nicholas, you have a nose," he said. Satan began to rise, but rather surprised to find that he could not budge. "Nicholas," says Bill, "how is your pulse? You don't look well. That is to say, you look worse than usual." Another attempted rise, but found it a mistake. "Thank you for coming along," said Bill. "I have a fancy to travel under your guidance, and we'll take the Low Countries in your way, won't we? Get to your legs, you sinner. You know a bargain's a bargain between 2 honest men. Nicholas," meaning you and yourself. "Judy, are the tongs hot?" Satan's face was worth looking at. as he turned his eyes from the husband to wife and then fastened them with the tongs, now turning a furnace heat on the fire, conscious at the same time that he could not move out of the chair. "Billy," he said, "you won't forget that I rewarded you won't forget that I rewarded your generosity last time I saw you in the way of business. Faith, Nicholas, it fails me to remember any generosity I ever showed you. Don't be womanish. I simply want to see what kind of stuff your nose is made out of. Whether it will stretch like a rogue's conscience. If it does, we'll flatter it up the flatter it up the chimney with the red-hot tongs. And when this old hat is fixed on the top of it, let alone for the weathercock. You have a fellow feeling, Mr. Dawson. You know we ought not to dispute. Drop the matter, and I will give you your next 7 years." "We know all that," says Billy, opening the red-hot tongs very coolly. "Mr. Dawson," said Satan, "if you cannot remember my friendship to yourself, don't forget how often I stood your father's friend, your grandfather's friend, and the friend of all your relations up to the 10th generation. I intended also to stand by your children after you, so long as you named Dawson. And a respectable one it is, might last." "Don't be blushing, Nick," says Bill. "You're too modest. That was ever your failing. Hold up your head. There's money bid for you. I'll give you such a nose, my good friend, that you will have to keep an outrider before you, to carry the end of it off his shoulder. Mr. Dawson, I pledge my honor to raise your children to the end as high as they can go, no matter whether they desire it or not." "That's very kind of you," says the other. "And don't do as much for your nose." He gripped it as he spoke, and the old boy immediately sung out. Bill pulled, and the nose went with him like a piece of warm wax. He then transferred the tongs to Judy, got a ladder, and resumed the tongs, ascended to the chimney, and tugged steadily at the nose until he got 5 feet above the roof, and then fixed the hat upon it, came down. "There's a weathercock," said Billy. "I defy Ireland to show as much of beauty. Faith, Nick, it makes the prettiest steeple of a church in all of Europe. That old hat fits it like a shaving." In this state, with his nose twisted up the chimney, Satan sat down some time, experiencing the novelty of what might be termed a particular sensation. At last the worthy husband and wife went to relent. "I think," said Bill, "that we have made the most of the nose, as well as the joke. I believe, Judy, it's long enough." "What is?" says Judy. "Why, the joke." "Faith, and I think so is his nose," said Judy. "What do you say yourself, Satan?" "Nothing at all, Bill," said the other. "But that's a good joke. An excellent joke, and a goodly nose, too, as it stands. You're always a gentlemanly man, Bill, and did things with grace. Still, I might have opinion of such a trifle." "It's no trifle at all," says Bill. "If you spake the nose, very well, it is not," says the other. "Still, both the joke and the nose without further violence. Would you lay me under very heavy obligation, which I shall be ready to acknowledge and repay as I thought?" Said Bill. "Shall it once more, and be off for 7 years. As much as you came down the last time, and vanish." The words were scarcely spoken when the money was at his feet and Satan invisible. Nothing could surpass the mirth of Bill and his wife at the result of the adventure. They laughed till they were down on the floor. It is useless to go over the same ground again. Bill was still incorrigible. The money went as the devil's money always does. Bill caroused and squandered and could never turn a penny of it to a good purpose. In this way, year after year went, till the 7th was closed, and Bill's hour came. He was now, and had been for some time past, as miserable a knave as ever. Not a shilling had he, nor a shilling's worth, with the exception of his forge, his cabin, and a few articles of crazy furniture. It was in the States he was standing with furniture as before, straining his ingenuity how to make a break fast, when Satan came to look after him. The old gentleman was sorely puzzled how to get at him. He kept sulking and sneaking at the forge for some time until he saw Bill hadn't come with a cross to bless himself with. He immediately charged himself into a guinea and lay into the open field where he knew Bill would see him. If, said he, I get into the position, I can manage him. The honest smith took the bait, for it was well gilded, and clutched the guinea into the purse and closed it up. Oh, shouted the devil out of the purse. You're caught, Bill, and I've secured you at last, you knave, you. Why don't you despair, you villain, and when you think of what's before you? Why, you unlucky old dog, said Bill. Is it you in there? Will you always drive your head into every loophole that's set for you? Nick, faith of her, I never had you bagged till now. Satan then began to tug and struggle within view of trying to get out of the purse, but in vain. Mr. Dawson, he said, we understand each other. I'll give you 7 years additional and the cash on the nail. But Isaac Nicholas, you know the weight of the hammer, that's enough. It's not a whipping of feathers that you're going to get, or anyhow. Just be easy. Mr. Dawson, I grant I'm not your match. Release me, and I'll double the cash. I was merely trying your temper to what I took the shape of a guinea. Faith, and I'll try yours before you have it. I've a notion. He immediately commenced with the sledge, and Satan rang out with a considerable want of firmness. Am I heavy enough? Said Bill. Lighter, William, if you love me. I haven't been latterly, Mr. Dawson. I have been delicate. My health, in short, is a very precarious state, Mr. Dawson. I can believe that, said Bill. And it will be more so when I'm done with you. Am I doing it right? Bill, said Nick, is this gentlemanly treatment of your own respectable shop? Do you think if you dropped into a little place that I'd actually rascally part towards you? Have you no compunction? I know, replied Bill, sledging away at the vehemence, that you're notorious for giving your friends warm welcome. Devil and old youth more so. But you have been dealing in bad coin, must you? However, good or bad, you're in for a sweat now, you sinner. Am I doing it purty? Lovely, William, but, if possible, a little more delicate. Oh, how delicate you are. Maybe a cup of tea would save you. Or a little small gruel to compose your stomach. Mr. Dawson, said the gentleman in the purse, hold your hand and let us understand one another. I have a proposal to make. You're the sinner anyhow, said the wife. Name your own sum, said Satan. Only set me free. No, a sorrow may take the toe you'll budge till you let off a go, said the wife. Hold him hard, Bill. Barney sets you clear of your engagement. There it is, my posy, said Bill. That's the condition. If you don't give up yours at once, you must double the cash you gave last time, so. And if you're of that option, say leave the cash and be off. The money again appeared with the glittering heap before Bill, which. Then he exclaimed, I has it, you dog. Take your poor pumps now. Fair weather to you, you vagrant. But Nicholas, Nick, here. The other looked back and saw Bill, a broad grin upon him, shaking his purse at him. Nicholas, come back. I'm short a guinea. Nick shook his fist and disappeared. It would be useless to stop now, merely to inform our readers that Bill was beyond improvement. In short, he once more took to his old habits and lived exactly the same manner as before. He had 2 sons, one a great blackguard as himself, who was also named after him. The other was well-conditioned, virtuous young man named James, who left his father, having relied upon his own industry and honest perseverance in life. Arrived afterwards to great wealth and built a town called Castle Dawson, which is also called from its founder until this day. Bill, at length, in spite of all of his wealth, was obliged, as he himself said, to travel, to the other words. He fell asleep one day and forgot to awaken, and in plainer terms, he died. Now, it is usual when a man dies to close the history of his life and adventures at once, but with our hero this cannot be the case. The moment Bill departed, he very unnaturally bent his steps towards the residence of St. Morsky, as being, in his opinion, likely to lead him towards the snuggest berth he could readily make out. On arriving, he gave a humble kind of knock, and St. Morsky opened. God save your reverence, said Bill, very submissively. Be off. There's no admittance here for so poor a youth as you are, said St. Morsky. He was now so cold and fatigued that he cared little for where he went, provided only that he said himself. He could rest his bones, get the air out of fire. According to arriving at the large black gates, he knocked, as before, and was told he would get instant admittance the moment he gave his name. Bill Dawson, he replied. Off instantly, said the porter to his companions, and let his majesty know that the rascal he dreads so much is here at the gate. Such a racket and tumult were never heard as the very mention of Billy Dawson created. In the meantime, his old acquaintance came running towards the gate with such haste and consternation that his tail several times nearly tripped on his heels. Don't admit that rascal, he shouted. Bar the gates, make every chain and lock and bolt fast. I won't be safe, and I won't stay here long. Nor none of us need stay here if he gets in. My bones are sore yet after him. No, no, begone, you villain. You'll get no entrance here. I know you too well. Bill could not help giving a broad, malicious grin at Satan, and pulling his nose through the gate bars, he exclaimed, Ha, you old dog! I have you afraid of me at last, have I? He had scarcely uttered the words when his foe, who stood inside, instantly tweaked him by the nose, and Bill felt as though he had been gripped by the same red-hot tongs in which he himself had previously tweaked the nose of Nicholas. Bill then departed, but soon found that in consequence of the inflammable materials for which his strong drink had burned to his nose, the organ immediately took fire, and indeed, to tell the truth, kept burning night and day, summer and winter, without ever once going out. From that hour to this. Such was the sad fate of Billy Dawson, who has been walking without stop or stay from place to place ever since, and in consequence of the flame on his nose, his beard being tangled like a wisp of hay, he had been christened by the country folk as Will-o'-the-Wisp, while, as it were, to show the mischief of his disposition, the circulating knave, knowing that he must seek out the coldest bogs and quagmires in order to cool his nose, seizes upon that ordinary of misleading and unthinking and tipsy night travelers from their way, just that he might have the satisfaction of still taking in as many as possible. Well, did not see that coming. Well, the Wisp is actually a person
Did not see that coming.
that tricked Satan so badly that he was banned.
Tricked Satan so badly that he was banned.
Damn. That almost put us at 2 hours. That's hour 45. Shoot.
Damn. That almost put us at 2
Notice how I still won.
That's hour 45.
That really was a long story. Damn. Anyway, that's all we're really going to go for tonight. I've only got one more week's worth of this book to go. So, let's go ahead and read Sly.
Let's go ahead and read Sly.
If I can type. And, no. Have a good night, Cubs. Go have fun watching her. What is she doing? She's playing Resident Evil. It's draft, so.
Down, you ready? You ready? I guess so. Whoa.
Hi.
You ready? You sure? What's happening?
Have a good one, Cubbies. Night.